Hello and welcome to my video on Paper 1 exam technique for Sociology A-Level and basically how to get an A-star. So in this video, we're going to look at some tips and advice, understanding the mark scheme, and some example of exam question answers. So starting off with my tips and advice, my tips for exam questions are to signpost, and this is when you indicate that you're answering the question and every part of the question by using the keywords from the question, but also from the mark scheme. Because as you'll see, the mark scheme is very straightforward in the way that examiners are meant to give you the marks. So if you use like some keywords from the mark scheme, the examiners will be made aware that you are answering according to the guidelines and will give you the marks more easily. And then same with if you use the keywords in the question, you're ensuring that you are answering the question, but you're also making it easier for the examiner to give you those marks as well. My second one is to have clear and short sentences. So if you have multiple short sentences explaining, like what you should have is multiple short sentences explaining step by step your point, and that shows that you know what you're saying rather than like trying to figure out what to say. So if you have a really long sentences, examiners will get lost and will also not know where you're going, and it will give the impression you don't know what you're talking about. So it's much better to have short and clear sentences, step by step, explain your points. And the examiners will give you more marks. And then lastly is to be specific. So don't make generalized statements and generalized examples. Again, this will be we'll see this in my sample responses so that you understand better. And then my advice for preparing for exam questions would be to read the mark scheme. This is super important because you'll see the way that examiners mark, but you'll also learn so much more than sometimes it's not in the textbook. Like many times in the mark schemes, I think actually always, at least not all the questions, but some of them do have like sample responses, and they will have like bullet points of like content you can bring in, and a lot of the time you can learn so many keywords, so many studies, so many ideas from the mark schemes just from reading the mark schemes that are sometimes not even in the book or are just explained better in the mark scheme. So I'd say read the mark scheme to understand how the grading works, but also to just gain knowledge about sociology. Then I would say read example answers to a certain type of question. So like you can do perhaps like one different type of question a week or maybe every day. So choose like I don't know like question 1 or question 2A, question 2B, question 3A, question 3B, or the essay question, and just read many examples of that type of question. And you can find that online on YouTube, on mark schemes, on past papers, in sample response papers. Um, there's so many resources online where you can find them in textbooks, etc. So read like a lot of examples of the like sample responses for that, and then practice that type of question. So do multiple questions, but like of the same type question, and then highlight the steps of the answers. So as we'll see, like each question has a specific format, and what you can like then do is highlight that specific format. So like for example, if say one question is 4 marks and they give you a mark for point, one for explaining, one for analyzing, and one for linking. Write your answer in 4 sentences and literally highlight those 4 steps, like each of them that you would be receiving a mark for. But you can do that as well for like essay paragraphs, which also should follow a structure, or the 3 mark questions, which also follow a structure. Like really highlight and make sure that you are doing what you're meant to do in each answer. And then repeat more questions of the same type until you get better at them. And then lastly, I would say sometimes it's better to use the book and focus on technique for answering questions, so for like practicing questions. And then I would generally advise to separate like content study and exam like technique study because it's very different. So I would say if you want to prepare for exam questions and you want to get the structure right, first use the book, use your notes, use your keyword list, use your sociologist list. Like don't focus on the content, focus on getting the technique right, and then obviously some other days study for the content, and then when it gets to like the last months or the last term in your school, then put it all together and do exam papers under time conditions and without the book. But yeah, for practice, for to get the exam technique right, don't even use time either. Like just do it on your own time, like no time conditions. So moving on to question 1. Question 1 will always be described to, and then you'd have either social values, social norms, traits of, and then a type of identity like gender identity, age identity, social class identity, etc. sampling techniques or research methods, like describe two and then something in sociology. Of course, these are just a couple, like of the most common ones that come up, but you could have anything else, like exams change every year. These are just some patterns that I've noticed that they could possibly ask. And then you would get a mark for identifying a point and then one for describing that point. So then you'd have 4 sentences and 4 marks in total. And I would generally do this in just one paragraph. Some students prefer to have 2 lines and 2 lines separate. That's also correct. Like you'll still get the marks as long as it's 4 sentences. So moving on to an example for question 1. We have described 2 types of research methods, and my answer would be one type of research method is structured interviews. In structured interviews, the researcher asks the respondent pre-decided close-ended questions. Another type of research method is covered participant observation. This is when the researcher studies the group they're researching by joining them undercover and participating in their behavior. So as you've seen here, signposting is the like what I've highlighted in bold. So one type of research method is, another type of research method is. So here you're showing that you're answering the questions and both parts of the question. The shortness, you can see that it's like 4 lines only, one for each mark. It's very concise. And then specificity, you can see in, for example, interviews. I suggest, like I mentioned, structured interviews and then describe it as pre-decided, close-ended questions. I could have said interviews. In interviews, the researcher asks respondents questions, but that would just sound very general, and it doesn't show sociological material as well as in structured interviews. The researchers asked the respondent pre-decided close-ended questions. And you could have said, like, in unstructured interviews, the researcher asked the respondent open-ended questions. But it's just because if not, the description of interviews would sound very basic, very simple, and it wouldn't be very sociological. And then covered participant observation, I mean, that's not like you can't really generalize the description for that. It's just more already specific for sociology. But I hope it shows signposting, shortness, and clarity very well. And then moving to question 2a, you would have explain 2 reasons why, and then researchers or sociologists or interpretivists or positivists might make this choice or find this hard. Now, this can again be very open, but like some patterns that I've noticed are like why this particular sociologist might choose or not choose a quantitative method or a qualitative method or a particular sampling method. Obviously, they'll give you the sampling method. They won't say a particular sampling method. Well, they might as well. Triangulation, and then if the question is like explain 2 reasons why researchers might find this hard, it tends to be uh, find it hard to be objective. But again, it could be different things. So for this one, you do need to do 2 paragraphs. And again, it's 4 lines per paragraph. So in a way, it's quite similar to the first question. It's just the lines work differently. So first, you would have a mark for making a point, given a reason. So just like this is like basically the same thing as the first question, and then you get a mark for explaining that point. So far it's the same as question 1, but then you have 1 mark for selecting relevant sociological material. So that means you bring in an example, and it doesn't have to be a study. It can just be an example you come up with, but it has to usually like try again to be specific and use sociological terms and not just general examples that are not very sociological. So use sociological terms and theories and perspectives as much as you can for those examples. And you could also use studies and sociologists. And then you would have 1 mark for showing how that material supports your point. So basically, you're analyzing and kind of linking that to your like point that you made in the beginning. So that would be 4 lines, and you do it twice. So you would have 8 marks in total. And so moving to an example, the example, like the question that I chose was explain 2 reasons why sociologists may choose to use stratified random sampling. And here's my answer. Again, in bold is the signposting. So one reason why sociologists may use stratified random sampling is to make research representative. This is because sociologists can have a sample with social characteristics proportional to the society they're studying. So far, this is my point and my explanation, and here's my example. For example, if a society comprises 60% men and 40% women, they can make their sample have that same proportion. And then here's my analysis and link like interpretation of this material. Basically, this is beneficial because results can be generalized as they will be representative of society. Again, my examples are not, I don't mean for them to be perfect. Obviously, I took the exam and I did get an A, but I These examples are my own. I can't assure you this is the perfect example, but this is generally how I would go answering it. Um, but yeah, different people might answer the questions differently. Like, I do want to say that in this video, like, none of these answers are actually like A-star answers, like confirmed by examiners. They're just answers that I did, which I hope are A level and A-star level. But yeah, I just wanted to like warn everyone. So moving to question 2b, this would usually be, this is actually one of the ones that least changes in the exams, which is explain two strengths or two limitations, or one strength and one limitation of, and then you'd have a research method. So this is really, really easy. It's like one of the easiest in the paper. You'd have 1 mark for identifying the strength and limitation, 1 mark for explaining why it has this strength and limitation, and then one for why this is a strength or a limitation. So you'd have 3 marks per paragraph and then 6 marks in total. Again, you could do like a whole paragraph for this, but generally I would recommend to separate, so have 3 lines and 3 lines, one for each strength or limitation. It's just much clearer for the examiner to mark. So my example would be, for the question, explain two limitations of field experiments. So I have one limitation of field experiments is that it's very difficult to control all variables. This is because they take place in natural settings. This is the limitation because it means they tend to establish correlations instead of causation. And then I have another limitation of field experiments is that there is a Hawthorne effect. This is because the respondents know that they're taking place in a research. This is a limitation because they might change their behavior, affecting the validity of the research. So you can see the 3 lines. So I make a point, and then I explain, and then I analyze. And I haven't actually put it in bold, but the signposting here would be one limitation. This is because, this is a limitation because. This is like key. Like, if you repeat this structure, you'll just get those 3 marks. Like, obviously what you say has to be correct, but the structure is like unchanging. Like, another limitation, this is because, and this is limitation because. Like, if you use the structure, you are more likely to be led to the right answer anyways, if you have studied. But yeah, that's the thing. If you answer in a different structure, it might be credited, but it's least likely to get all the marks. Like, I don't exactly know how examiners go about doing this, but I do know that the mark scheme says to use the structure, so I would really use the structure. And then just before I move on, I just realized that the last question, so for my example for 2a, I actually just have one paragraph, but you would have 2 paragraphs. Like, you'd have 4 marks per paragraph. I just made an example of one paragraph. It's just so you don't get confused, like, and only write one paragraph. It's explained two reasons, so you would need 2 paragraphs. Okay, so moving on to example, question 3a. So the common questions for 3a are social institutions. So you have like, family is the most important influence on gender identity, for example, but this could be changed by religion is the most important influence on age identity. Like, the social institution and the type of identity can change, or even it might be like a social institution, like, I don't know, media is the most important influence on identity, and like they don't even specify the identity, like just general. And then this is like a statement, and then they'll say explain this view. And another common question for this is, because you'll always have like a statement and then explain this view, but the two most common questions are this, like the one I already said, and then you would have a reason for defiance, and then is the main cause people act in defiant ways. And the reason for defiance might be under socialization, it might be cultural deprivation. There's a list in the syllabus of the reasons for defiance. I covered them in my, think it was one of my first, either the first or second video for Unit 1. I did cover all of them, but you have to know them because this is a very typical question. And yeah, again, explain this to you. So this is 10 marks in total, and it's divided into 5 mark paragraphs, because you need 2 clear and developed points. And this is what it says in the mark scheme. You need to show 2 paragraphs, good knowledge and understanding. So you have to show sociological material in both paragraphs, so concepts, theories, and evidence, and key terms, all of that. And also the material selected has to be appropriate, so it has to be relevant to the like question. You don't just pick any sociologists, any examples that are just, yes, like related to that topic but not related to the question, which is very tempting to do sometimes when you don't know what to come up with. It has to be like focus on the question, and you have to make the relevance clear. So like, when you have like point, explain, and you give the example, then you have to like analyze that and show why it's like relevant to the question. So an example of, again, this is only one paragraph, but you would have two of these, would be one reason that under-socialization causes deviance is that children who are under-socialized won't fit in the dominant culture and are thus more likely to join subcultures. These subcultures are more likely to take part in deviant behavior and criminal activities. For example, a sociologist called Miller found that common traits within subcultures include trouble, toughness, excitement, and autonomy. These would be seen as deviant by those in the dominant culture if they value order and peace. And then question 3b would be to kind of go against that. So they would say using sociological material, give one argument against this view. And you have to do a paragraph, one clear and developed argument against the view. So develop means that you expand your argument. So like point, explain, evidence, then you kind of like analyze that. So as you see, they tend to ask different questions and yes, different marks. And it's very important to know how many sentences or if to do one paragraph or two paragraphs to write. But generally, the structure doesn't change that much. And as we'll see later, all of this is just building you up to write essays. So this structured writing that they're really trying to get you to do is so you write very clear and very compelling essay paragraphs and overall essays in the end. Um, so for this, you would again need sociological material, concepts, theories, evidence to support the argument. Again, that material has to be appropriate and focused on the question and its elements made clear. So it's basically the same thing as before, but it's 6 marks. So you would probably need to have I'm trying to think how many sentences, but probably around 6 to 8 sentences, I would say. Just a small paragraph. Okay, it depends on your sentence length, but just a paragraph. Um, yeah, actually, I have an example. Oh, okay, I just skipped forward. I have an example here. So a better explanation of deviance is cultural deprivation. People who aren't socialized into the dominant culture face disadvantages that mean they can't be successful and have to turn to deviance. For example, Sugarman claims that lower class children are more likely to be socialized into immediate rather than deferred gratification. This is a form of what Bourdieu would call low cultural capital and makes it harder for them to be successful in school and get a good job in the future. This is likely to turn them to deviance, stealing to make their living. So again, you go against a view. So usually one of the easiest ways to go against a view they're asking you is suggest a better explanation. And this is very easy if we go back and look at the type of questions you would have. So if you have um, wait, if you have social institution, then you can just like, for example, if they say the family is the most important influence, then you can just in your like go against this view, be like, no, actually education is, or media is, or the workplace is. Like just choose another one and say why that is a better one. And if it's a reason for defiance, then just pick another one and say why that's better than the one that you just explained is the most important one. So it's very easy, but you can also directly criticize if there's like flaws in the view, like you can either directly criticize or you can juxtapose and suggest like a better explanation. And yeah, again, the signposting. So like one reason and these, and then the for example, and then these, like to analyze. Yeah, throughout. Okay, so then question 3b. Okay, sorry, this is question 3b. We've done that. Okay. So the essay question. This is I'm gonna like discuss the assessment objectives, and then I'm gonna give like more practical examples of how to get better at each assessment objective. So assessment objective one. Well, first of all, assessment objectives are what gets you the marks. So like essays are graded for each of these, and each of these have actually different weights, which I haven't actually included in this video, but you can check on the syllabus. They actually weigh differently, but well, I think they do. But you should still try to like do all of them really, really well. So the first one is knowledge and understanding. So that basically means that you have to have detailed points with good use of concepts, theory, and research evidence. So that means like studies, sociologists, perspectives, like just saying like, oh, feminists would argue this, or functionalists, or like positivists would say this. Like you don't exactly have to know sociologists. Just like using the theories is already like good, but obviously like to get higher marks, you do need to bring in like sociologists and studies. Like, but like you can also bring theories and keywords. I feel like a lot of people don't use keywords that much. Or don't realize the importance they actually have, but like you really should try to use keywords in the essays. AO2 is interpretation and application. So that means First of all, that the material you're actually writing is accurate and it's true. And then second, that it's well developed so that you actually are explaining the points you're making. You're not being general. You're actually explaining step by step with short sentences and examples, and also that you're constantly applying that to the question so that it's relevant and you're making those links back to the question. And then analysis and evaluation. So essay questions you have to evaluate, so kind of go against your opinion, and that has to be clear, explicit, and sustained. So I'm going to talk about what sustained means in a minute, but that's really, really key to get like those A stars instead of like A's. And clear and explicit means that you actually are showing that you're evaluating, that it's not like you're contradicting yourself, that you are evaluating. So like you would say like things like on the other hand, however, those show that you are explicitly making that evaluation rather than just suddenly without realizing writing something that goes against what you're saying. Um, so yes, so assessment one, looking at it more closely, that just basically means to use as many studies, keywords, and theories as possible. So the answer has to be sociological, basically. And suggestions that you could do to like study for this would be to make flashcards for sociologists, list of keywords, and just read through them, and then mind maps of perspectives. So assessment objective two, for the interpretation, just make sure you explain the evidence and concepts in your own words. So really key sentences to be using to show you're doing interpretation would be this means, this shows, this is because, and then you go on to explain. Application is just link to the question, show you're answering the question, and show that the sociological material is relevant. And one of the basic things is to always like end essay questions with thus, and then you reframe the question to a high or low extent because like you agree, because usually the exam question would be to what extent, so you make your stance say to a high or a low extent because, and that just using the keywords in the question is always good, and it's a really good way to end an essay. And then assessment objective three, analysis and evaluation. I've just made some like key things you can think of when having to evaluate key questions you can ask yourself when evaluating studies and theories, when you have to like evaluate in essays like previous paragraphs. So for studies, like if a paragraph that you have to evaluate is centered around a particular study, you can, in your paragraph against that, like evaluating that, you can like ask yourself, is that a biased study? Is there evidence? Of course, you can't just doubt that yourself. There has to be other sociologists, other perspectives that would call it biased for a reason. Of course, you can't just make it up or can't just accuse it of being biased if you don't have evidence of that. And usually it would have to be other sociologists having evidence rather than yourself. But yeah, sometimes some studies are really famous and really popular and are used, but other sociologists claim they're biased. So that could be evaluation. Can the findings be applied to everyone? And then remember CAGE, which is an acronym for class, age, gender, and ethnicity. Um, then strengths and weaknesses, methods used, and of theories used. So you can criticize like the theories or the methods used. But again, you would like it's not just your opinion. Like you have to like sociologists have to have said those points before. But if you ask these questions, then you can try to think of like those sociologists that might have said those things before. Like you kind of need to use evidence for this. But yeah, those are still questions to ask yourself. And then for theories, so criticisms and flaws of perspective. So like for example, if you did a paragraph on feminism, you can then say, actually, it's outdated. Postmodernists have a more accurate view of this, or it's overdeterministic, or it ignores certain things, or it exaggerates something else. But of course, I said feminism, but it could be any perspective. Like you could argue positivism is overdeterministic, or functionalists ignore um, human agency, like those kind of things. And then there could be criticisms from other perspectives. So, for example, the new right goes against functionalism, or just, but like you have to always use like evidence of those criticisms, and that you're saying perspectives due to each other, like societies that would go against each other, and studies and everything. And just some final tips and advice for essay questions. Again, the same thing goes for essay questions as for the shorter questions. Signposting, clear short sentences, and be specific. Like again, like as I said before, you're just answering, like you're just going to be following the same structure as for those paragraphs of like shorter questions. Keep 1 point per paragraph. This is very obvious, but like sometimes it can be very easy to get caught up and just end up arguing very similar things but different points in the same big paragraph. Only plan for 5 minutes. This is very crucial because I think, if I'm not wrong, you will have about 45 minutes left for your essay question. 50 if you're really quick at the first questions. So really, because you need to write a very long essay, you only have 5 minutes to plan. And this is not an issue because the next advice is go through many exams as possible and find patterns of questions. I have put here some of the main ones. And if you go to my videos for Unit 1 and 2, for each topic, I also have exam questions from those topics that come up more often. So if you go back to those videos, you'll find even more of them, but you can find them easily yourself if you just, like, it will take half an hour just like to have a look at like 10 or 15 papers from different years, different versions, and just make a note of the exam questions that repeat themselves. And then just once you know that and once you know the structure and you just study the content, it will be very easy to like make essay plans, or just in your head, like you already know what you're going to be asked. And once you kind of do 1 or 2 questions and you know there are a pattern, you already know how to answer them. So it really will only take 5 minutes if you're prepared for the exam questions, because basically you can't prepare yourself for all the exam questions you'll get. Sociology is really good, and that's like the easy part of the subject, is that the exam doesn't change. It doesn't really change unless this year they decide to change it, but it's really easy to just uh, prepare for it, and then that would allow you to just have 5 minute planning, like just like the basically write like the point you're going to be making in each paragraph, in bullet points. And then read example essays. Again, read those A star answers, but also read those C answers and then see the difference. When you look at the mark scheme, don't just look at like the top marks, compare the top and the next to the top one so you can see the difference as well between that. And obviously, if you're in a lower grade boundary, then read all of them up to the top one so you can understand what to do better. But don't just be the top one, because then you won't learn what you could be doing wrong that you're not realizing you're doing wrong. And then read the examiner reports. Again, the marks team, I already mentioned that, but the examiner reports are reports that examiners write after like a whole exam session, and they write what students did well, what they didn't do well, and that's in terms of like exam technique, but also content, what like they didn't study. It's designed for schools and teachers, but it's really useful for students as well. And then lastly, just remember PEEL. This is really basic, but point, explain, evidence, and link will always come in useful in essays. Obviously, you can't have a 4-line sentence in an essay, like paragraph, but it's just something to keep in mind to kind of keep doing, and you can actually repeat it many times. And actually, I've just realized that I haven't talked about sustained answers. I don't know how that happened. But yeah. Um, I think I had a slide explaining that, but basically that means that you make your opinion on the introduction in essays. Like, to get those top marks, you have to state in the introduction if you agree or you disagree. Like, if you support the question, like to what extent, you have to state either to a high extent or to a low extent, and then throughout the essay you have to keep coming to that. So say you do a paragraph in favor of that, then you have to evaluate. So you can do a paragraph against the paragraph that you were in favor of, but after that paragraph of going against, you would have to have a couple of lines kind of counter evaluating that evaluation and kind of restating your opinion, like why actually like that's the evaluation is wrong. And then the next paragraph again goes support, and then you do, if you do one against, then you kind of go against that against paragraph, if that makes sense. You can do this in different ways. Like, you can first have like all the paragraphs of in favor and then the ones against, and then paragraphs against those against. So you can either integrate the, like, whenever you evaluate against your view, basically you always have to like counter evaluate and kind of reframe your opinion, because otherwise you're just juxtaposing arguments and you're not actually like sustaining your opinion. So basically, it just means you have to come back to your opinion. And either you can integrate like counter evaluation in the evaluation paragraph, or you can put it into like another paragraph. Like, it depends of how you want to do it. But yeah, that's really one of the main things that gets students, like prevents students from getting those A stars, is that they might have excellent essays, they might be evaluating, but they're not doing it sustained in a sustained way. Yeah. So yeah, that all comes with practice again. And that's the end of the video. I hope you found it useful, and please like and subscribe and send to your friends, send to your classmates. Now that exams are soon approaching. And yeah, I hope you really enjoyed it.